Hi there, welcome back to the HTML5 game development video course. In the last section, we generated the game levels and calculated the game score. In this section, we further polish the game to publish it. We create a menu scene and game over scene. We define Scene Manager to manage their visibility. Then, we use similar technique to display the calculated score in a head-up display, also known as HUD. At last, we design the web page that hosts the game and configure the game icon for adding the game web page to the home screen. Let's get started on the first video. Create a main menu scene. In this video, we define the scene constant in HTML. We also redefine the game element as one of the scene. Then, we code some CSS to overlay the scenes in front of the game screen. Then, in JavaScript, we define a Scene Manager class to manage the visibility of different scenes. At last, we switch scenes when player clicks on the buttons on the scenes. Let's open the game project in Code Editor. In the index.html file, we add a div after the game canvas element. We define the div to be a scene class, which we also add active. Non-active scene will be hidden. An active scene is displayed in front of the game screen. We want to give each scene a unique ID. We give the menu scene an ID menu. Inside the menu scene, we define a Start Game button. This button links to the game canvas, which has an ID Game Canvas defined. We give this button an ID for JavaScript to handle its clicking logic. Then, we use one line to introduce the game. In the game canvas, we also add an active scene class to it. Scene is something that overlay to each other within a parent container. The #game element is the container. We define the dimension in the container. We also set the overflow to be hidden. We can overlay HTML elements together by setting their position to absolute. But we also need to set their parent container to have non-static position. Here, we set the #game element to have relative position. Then, we define the properties for the .scene class. We set the position to be absolute with top 0 and left 0 value. We also set the dimension to be 100% width and 100% height, which means following the parent's dimension. Then, we set a background color to each scene. These settings stack the scenes together. Only the frontmost scene is visible unless we have further adjustment. In the scene, we want to align the content to the middle for better visual presentation. We can use text align to achieve that. Then comes the transform and transition. For every non-active scene, we want to place the scene below the game screen. By default, scene is non-active until we assign an active class to it. So, in the .scene class style, we use transform and translate to move the scene to the bottom of the game screen by setting the y-axis to 100% in the translate 3D function. Then, we define style for .scene.active. This is for any HTML element that has both scene class and active class. For these active screens, we reset the translate to be 0x, 0y, and 0z. We want some transition animation between the active state and non-active state. We can do that by setting the transition rule to the .scene style. The first parameter is to tell which rule to have transition. We set to transform here. The second parameter is the duration. We want it to be 300 milliseconds. This duration is smooth enough, but not too long. The third parameter is the easing function, which defines the change rate of the value. An ease out often works well. A link in the scene is usually a button that connects different game scenes. For example, the Start button or Reset button later. we want to style these links to look like a button. In the CSS, we define the every A inside .scene with a button style. We also set the hover state so the players can clearly tell it's a clickable element when they hover the mouse over the A links. These CSS code define the essential styles for the scene management. We will make it beautiful in later video. Time for some JavaScript to manage the scene. Let's move to the game es6.js file. We define a new scene manager class. In the constructor, we store the element reference. They are menu scene, game scene, and start button. We define two functions that shows the game and shows the menu scene. Then, we want to allow switching from menu scene to game scene. We can define a function to handle player clicking. Inside the function, we store the reference of manage instance, which we will use inside the click handler. Then, we handle the click of the start game button. When it is clicked, we tell the manager to start the game, which hides the menu scene. Then, we call the game to start. The button is an A link, but we don't want the browser behaves like a normal link. So, we call event prevent default and return as false. In the game loading logic, we use to start the game right after the game is loaded. Now, we wait for the player to click the start button. So, when the game is loaded, we set a variable to true. And in the game constructor, we change the variable to false. Now, we have defined a new class, but we haven't used it. At the end of the file, we can create an instance of Scene Manager by calling new Scene Manager. Let's save the files and upload the game to the hosting server. Then, open the game in latest web browser. We can see the menu scene after the page loads. When we click on the Start Game button, the menu scene slides are and the game starts. In this video, we have defined a Scene Manager class. We added our first scene, the menu scene, and also create the essential styles for the scene presentation. In the next video, we add another scene to the game over scene. We will also trigger the game over logic when the hero dies in the game.